So the White House Correspondents' Dinner was this weekend, and President Biden was full of jokes. It's what is typical there, right? Each president having their joke-filled speech, more of a lighter moment, but also an opportunity to take some big hits, and that's what Biden did against Trump. Take a listen.
Age is the only thing we have in common. My vice president actually endorses me. I had a great stretch since the State of the Union, but Donald has had a few tough days lately. You might call it stormy weather. What the hell?
Congressman Rose, up until now, President Biden has really gone out of his way to not talk about Trump's trial. He went there.
Sure. No, look, I think it's a very important political tact here, because certainly
to talk about it or not talk about it.
Well, it's not just the subject matter, but it is speaking to the fact that Donald Trump is such an utter joke. Right. You know, it is incredibly important that the Biden campaign makes the point that Trump is a threat to democracy and all that we hold dear. But concurrently, and I think that's what you're seeing here, a huge part of their campaign needs to be Donald Trump is not up to the task, and he is just a mockery and a joke of anyone purporting to be a leader. You know, and the more that President Biden can take on the issues that people claim are negative towards him, particularly age, and making light of it, the better it will be for his campaign. Ronald Reagan famously did that in his reelection campaign when he said, look, we can make age an issue here. I think my opponent's youth and inexperience is his biggest detriment. And so you're seeing that in this speech as well, and I think you'll see it in the months to come in the campaign.
Dasha, you've been out there on the campaign trail talking to voters. How much are they paying attention to this trial and whether or not President Biden is talking about it?
Well, there are two things that Trump voters love about Trump. Number one, that he's a fighter. Number two, and this is often understated, he's funny. He really makes people laugh at these rallies, and he can make fun of his opponents in a way that resonates with his base. And that's what Biden did at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. The thing that I've been hearing from Democratic voters is they don't want Biden to be Trump by any means, but they do want to see him in that fighting position and bringing a little bit of levity, too. I mean, Biden, for a long time, his political career, he was a charming guy. He was an empathetic guy, and now mixing the funny with the sort of fighting back position is something that I think is going to resonate with those Democratic voters that have been looking for a little bit more of that from him.
Congressman Curbelo, RFK Jr. says he expects to get ballot access in 3 more states this week. There has been a mix of polling on how he would impact the race come November, showing him eating into both Biden and Trump's numbers. Who do you think should be more worried that RFK Jr. isn't going anywhere?
I think, Anna, in the long term, right, not here in the next few months, but as people get to know RFK, and it's pretty clear that he is going nowhere, he is going to compete in all of these states. In the long run, he is fundamentally an anti-establishment candidate, and I think that will end up hurting Donald Trump more than Joe Biden, especially given RFK's prominent role in the anti-vax movement. That is a movement that has become more aligned with the Republican Party since the pandemic. So I think as more people get to know RFK, what he stands for, I think the threat grows for Donald Trump. Right now, a lot of people just assume he's a Kennedy and he's a typical liberal politician. That's not really the case. So I think right now, some polls are showing that this is hurting Joe Biden, but as people get to know RFK and his platform more, I think the risk grows for former President Trump.
What do you think, Congressman Rose?
Yeah, look, you're going to see negative ads against RFK coming from both sides. It depends on the poll, really, which voter he's drawing from, which candidate he's drawing from. Donald Trump is already speaking negatively about RFK.
Yeah, those two were exchanging punches against each other.
Yeah.
Clearly, it sounds like RFK is getting to him.
Absolutely. I mean, the latest poll showed that he's drawing significantly from Trump voters due to that anti-establishment stance that he has on so many positions. Of course, you could see some liberals wrongfully thinking, oh, the Kennedy name, this and that. But I think for the first time, what we're going to see in these summer months is pretty significant amount of resources coming from both sides targeted towards a third-party candidate, actually on the airwaves in the swing districts, and the sooner the better, because from the Democratic standpoint, we need this to be a two-way race and have the focus on the extraordinary threat that extremist MAGAism and Trumpism faces towards all that we hold dear.
All right, Dasha Burns, former Congressman Max Rose, and former Congressman Carlos Curbelo, thank you all.